If you were to walk through the streets of Athens at dusk, you would notice something unusual. Certain doors remained closed, certain voices unheard, and certain lives carefully hidden from public view. What was permitted, what was ignored, and what was quietly accepted formed an invisible system, one that governed relationships as carefully as it governed politics. It is easy to imagine ancient Greece as a world of marble temples, clear blue skies, and philosophers debating beneath olive trees. Yet behind this familiar image lay a society governed not only by ideas and laws, but by quiet routines, unspoken rules, and carefully maintained social boundaries. To understand how the ancient Greeks lived, one must sometimes look away from their grand achievements and instead observe the ordinary, regulated details of daily life. Details that reveal how deeply order and structure shaped even the most private aspects of existence. In the city of Athens, as the sun rose over tiled rooftops and narrow streets, daily life followed patterns that had been established over generations. Men left their homes early, walking toward the agora, the central marketplace and civic heart of the city. There, trade took place alongside political discussion, legal disputes, and philosophical conversations. Citizenship defined who could speak, who could vote, and who could participate in public life. The city was alive with voices, yet not all voices were considered equal. Within the household, life moved at a slower and more enclosed pace. Respectable women of citizen families remained largely inside, overseeing domestic tasks such as spinning wool, managing servants, and caring for children. Their presence in public spaces was limited and often discouraged. Modesty and restraint were not merely personal virtues, but social expectations, tied closely to family honor and legitimacy. A woman's role was defined not by public achievement, but by continuity, ensuring that the household remained stable and that lineage remained unquestioned. Marriage in ancient Greece was not primarily a romantic institution. It was a social contract, arranged to unite families, secure alliances, and produce legitimate heirs. Emotional intimacy was not its central purpose. Instead, marriage functioned as one component of a broader system designed to preserve order within the city-state. Personal desires were secondary to civic responsibility. Outside this domestic structure existed other forms of social interaction that followed different rules. Among these was the symposium, a gathering that combined dining, drinking, and conversation. Symposia were attended almost exclusively by men, particularly those of wealth and status. Cushioned couches were arranged around low tables, wine was mixed with water according to custom, and discussions unfolded gradually over the course of the evening. At these gatherings, conversation ranged widely. Politics, poetry, ethics, and art were all considered suitable topics. The atmosphere was structured yet relaxed, governed by tradition rather than spontaneity. Music and recitations might accompany the discussion, but excess was frowned upon. The symposium was not chaos, it was ritualized leisure. It was within this environment that a particular group of women occupied a unique social position. Known as hetairai, these women existed outside the conventional roles assigned to wives and daughters. Unlike most women in Athens, hetairai were educated. They were trained to speak well, to understand literature, and to participate intelligently in conversation. Many were skilled in music and poetry, and some developed reputations for wit and insight. The presence of hetairai at symposia was considered not improper. On the contrary, their participation was often expected. They were not confined to silence or invisibility. Instead, they engaged openly with philosophers, politicians, and artists, contributing to discussions and shaping social dynamics. Their value lay not only in companionship, but in intellect and cultural fluency. This distinction between women of the household and women of the symposium reflected a broader separation within Greek society. Public life and private life were governed by different standards, and individuals were judged according to how well they fulfilled the expectations of their assigned roles. What mattered was not equality, but balance, each class and category maintaining its proper place. Sexual relationships, like all aspects of life, were understood through this framework of order and hierarchy. Rather than being defined by personal identity or emotional attachment, relationships were evaluated based on status, citizenship, and social function. Certain relationships were accepted, others condemned, not because of moral outrage, but because of their perceived impact on social stability. Art and literature from the period reflect this pragmatic attitude. Vase paintings, plays, and philosophical texts often depict intimacy in a direct and unembellished manner. These representations were not intended to shock or provoke, but to document aspects of life as they were understood. Desire was treated as a natural force, one that required regulation rather than denial. Religion and mythology reinforced these views. The gods themselves were portrayed as complex beings, capable of desire, jealousy, and contradiction. Their stories did not present moral absolutes, but illustrated the consequences of excess and imbalance. Through myth, the Greeks explored the boundaries of behavior without necessarily prescribing universal rules. Different city-states approached these matters in distinct ways. Sparta, for example, emphasized physical strength and civic contribution over domestic seclusion. Women in Sparta experienced greater visibility and autonomy, though always within a framework designed to serve the state's needs. Athens, by contrast, prioritized order through separation and restraint. As centuries passed, these systems evolved, but their underlying principles remained remarkably consistent. Sexuality was never isolated from society. It was woven into law, tradition, and public expectation. To understand it is not to judge it by modern standards, but to see it as part of a carefully constructed social world. In that world, every interaction carried meaning, and every role served a purpose. From the quiet household to the lively symposium, from the citizen wife to the educated hetairae, each figure occupied a defined place within the rhythm of the city. It was within these rhythms that ancient Greece sustained itself, not only through philosophy and art, but through the everyday regulation of human relationships.
Even in a society so highly structured, everyday life in Athens was full of subtle routines and small observations. The city's citizens moved through a rhythm dictated by sunrise and the public calendar. Market stalls were arranged in long rows, their merchants calling out the day's wares in tones measured more by habit than enthusiasm. Baskets of olives, loaves of bread, clay pots, and fish were displayed carefully, each object having its place and each transaction following an unspoken protocol. Men of standing entered the agora to inspect, to negotiate, or simply to watch, while the ordinary laborers carried out tasks learned over years, repeating the same motions day after day. Even the streets themselves seemed to have rules, some enforced, some tacitly understood. Certain areas were frequented only by men conducting business or attending assemblies, while others remained paths for domestic errands and mundane deliveries. Within the household, the roles of women and children were clearly delineated. While male citizens could move freely, attending public spaces, symposia, and workshops, women's movements were confined to private quarters and the immediate areas of their homes. Daily routines involved spinning wool, tending to food storage, cleaning floors, and instructing children in literacy and moral expectations. The repetitive nature of these chores created a predictable cadence to life, a rhythm that required patience and precision. It was in this repetition that social stability was maintained. The quiet diligence of women in private spheres balanced the visible activity of men in the public domain, reinforcing the societal expectation that each person knew their role and acted accordingly. Marriage, as understood in Athens, was a strategic and civic institution rather than a romantic or emotional one. Families arranged unions to consolidate wealth, strengthen alliances, and ensure the production of legitimate heirs. The wedding ceremony itself, while marked with ritual and modest celebration, emphasized duty over desire. Once married, a woman's primary purpose was the continuation of her household, the management of domestic labor, and the cultivation of children who would grow to participate in civic life. Emotional intimacy, although present in varying degrees, was secondary to the responsibilities assigned by custom and law. Men, in contrast, experienced social freedom that allowed them to cultivate personal relationships outside the household, provided that such engagements did not compromise the legal and social position of the family. Relationships with women outside the household, including hetairai and foreign-born companions, were socially recognized to varying degrees, depending on the context. These interactions were governed by hierarchy, discretion, and adherence to civic expectations rather than personal morality. In this way, the Greeks maintained balance. Public order coexisted with private indulgence, each regulated by clearly understood conventions. The hetairai, in particular, occupied a liminal space between public visibility and private discretion. Educated and articulate, they were capable of engaging in sustained conversation about politics, philosophy, poetry, and art. They participated in symposia, where their contributions were valued not only for entertainment, but for intellectual engagement. In these gatherings, their role contrasted sharply with that of married women, who remained largely invisible in public life. This distinction reflected a broader societal principle. Freedom and visibility were closely tied to social position, training, and function, rather than gender alone. Symposia themselves were highly ritualized events. Guests reclined on cushions arranged around low tables, while wine, always diluted with water according to custom, was served slowly. Conversation progressed deliberately, each idea given its due consideration. Music or poetry might accompany the discussion, but always at a restrained volume and pace. Excessive laughter or disruptive behavior was discouraged, as the gathering's purpose was not mere entertainment, but the cultivation of refinement, intellectual curiosity, and social cohesion. Within this structured environment, relationships unfolded according to expectation. Men conversed with men, hetairai contributed when invited, and everyone understood the boundaries of participation. Social rules extended to sexual behavior as well. Citizens were expected to manage desire responsibly, ensuring that personal indulgences did not interfere with public obligations. Sexual relationships were regulated by law, custom, and social understanding, with particular concern given to inheritance, legitimacy, and family honor. The framework governing these interactions was subtle but pervasive, shaping behavior without requiring constant enforcement. In this system, order and discretion were valued above passion or emotional expression. Art, literature, and philosophy reflected these social attitudes. Vase paintings, theatrical works, and written texts often depicted intimacy in clear but controlled terms. Myths explored desire and consequence, portraying gods and heroes whose actions embodied both natural impulses and societal caution. In examining these sources, one sees that the Greeks did not treat sexuality as something separate from social organization. Rather, it was integrated into the very structure of civic life, inseparable from law, custom, and moral expectation. Regional differences existed within the Greek world. Sparta, for instance, emphasized physical education and civic duty, allowing women comparatively greater freedom and visibility than their Athenian counterparts. Even so, all city-states placed constraints on behavior tailored to the priorities of governance, military readiness, and social continuity. In each case, the principles guiding relationships were designed to maintain balance, prevent disorder, and sustain the structures that allowed the city-state to function over generations. As centuries passed, these systems of expectation, routine, and regulation became deeply ingrained. The interplay between public and private, visible and hidden, duty and indulgence created a society in which every participant understood their role, often without explicit instruction. The repetition of daily life, the careful observance of custom, and the attention to hierarchy ensured continuity across generations. Even as individuals lived out their personal stories, they did so within a framework that preserved the city-state, its traditions, and its ideals. In the quiet of the Athenian household, in the measured speech of a symposium, and in the remarkable tasks of the marketplace, one could witness the disciplined rhythms of Greek life. These rhythms defined not only the structure of society, but also the texture of daily existence. They reveal a civilization in which intimacy, desire, and social engagement were integrated into a complex network of expectation, hierarchy, and ritual. Understanding these patterns allows one to appreciate the subtle forces that shaped one of history's most influential societies, not through grand events or dramatic acts, but through the careful organization of ordinary life.
In Athens, citizenship was the foundation of public life, determining not only one's rights but also one's responsibilities. To be a citizen was to participate in a system that valued order, discussion, and adherence to tradition. Only free-born men whose parents were both citizens could claim this status, and with it came the right to vote, speak in assemblies, and hold public office. The privileges of citizenship were inseparable from obligations, attending the courts, serving in the military, paying taxes, and engaging in civic duties. These obligations reinforced the idea that individual actions were measured against the needs of the city rather than personal preference. Education was closely tied to citizenship. Boys of citizen families began formal instruction around the age of 7, studying literacy, numeracy, music, and physical training. The curriculum was designed to cultivate both the mind and the body, preparing young men to participate fully in civic life. Lessons were repeated carefully and memorized, with discipline emphasizing accuracy and endurance. Beyond practical knowledge, education instilled a sense of moral responsibility and awareness of social hierarchy. The rhythm of learning mirrored the rhythm of the city, structured, deliberate, and predictable. Girls' education was far more limited, focused primarily on household management, weaving, and basic literacy when possible. Their instruction reinforced the roles they would later fulfill as wives and mothers. Social mobility through education was reserved almost entirely for boys, ensuring that the mechanisms of civic control remained tightly maintained. In this way, the city cultivated a population that understood its place, its rights, and its duties from an early age. Laws in Athens reflected these social priorities. Legal codes addressed not only property, contracts, and crime, but also marriage, inheritance, and behavior within households. Enforcement was often public and ritualized. Trials were held in open spaces, speeches were delivered slowly and measuredly, and outcomes were recorded for the sake of precedent. Law was less about punishment alone and more about teaching citizens the boundaries of acceptable conduct. Even minor transgressions were framed as lessons in social equilibrium. By understanding the legal framework, individuals could navigate the complexities of relationships, family obligations, and public interaction without threatening social stability.
The courts themselves functioned as extensions of the broader civic order. Citizens presented their cases in a structured format, often rehearsed and carefully organized. Judges and jurors listened patiently, applying both the letter of the law and the customary expectations that had developed over generations. Trials were social events as much as legal proceedings, reinforcing hierarchies, alliances, and roles that sustained the city. Observing or participating in a trial was an education in itself, demonstrating the careful calibration between personal action and communal consequence. Social gatherings, particularly symposia, complemented these formal structures by cultivating cultural and intellectual refinement. Within these gatherings, participants learned the subtle rules of discourse, when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to balance wit with decorum. The presence of hetairai introduced an element of engagement that was simultaneously intellectual and social. Their participation provided a model for understanding conversation, influence, and social navigation within the bounds of acceptable behavior. In this way, symposia functioned as informal schools of civility, teaching lessons that were as important as those learned in formal education. Even leisure was shaped by structure. Physical training, athletic contests, musical practice, and poetry recitation were carried out with attention to repetition and discipline. These activities were not purely for enjoyment. They reinforced endurance, patience, and adherence to convention. The city's calendar itself dictated times for festivals, religious observances, and market cycles. Every moment of public and private life was orchestrated to maintain continuity, rhythm, and predictability. Within households, the private enforcement of social rules mirrored the public order. Parents instructed children in expected behavior, emphasizing the repetition of tasks, adherence to norms, and the cultivation of skills appropriate to each role. Servants, slaves, and laborers also operated within hierarchies that mirrored the city at large. Observing the orderly completion of daily routines, one could see the integration of law, education, and custom into the fabric of life. Stability was not accidental. It was produced through careful attention to repetition, hierarchy, and expectation. Relationships between men and women were similarly regulated. While citizen men could engage in extramarital relations under specific conditions, women's behavior was closely monitored by family and social norms. Even within these constraints, nuance existed. Affection, mentorship, and intellectual companionship could flourish under supervision, providing a space for connection without disrupting social expectations. Sexuality, like other aspects of life, was structured to support order, legitimacy, and hierarchy rather than personal desire alone. Religion and ritual further reinforced this structure. Temples, festivals, and sacrifices marked the passage of time and reminded citizens of their place within a cosmos governed by gods and fate. Participation in these observances was both personal and civic. By engaging in ritual, individuals internalized the values of the city, reaffirmed social boundaries, and reinforced a shared understanding of appropriate behavior. These practices connected the private and public, linking daily routines with cosmic order. Education, law, ritual, and social convention together created a society in which every individual understood their role. From the youngest student memorizing verses to the elder attending the agora, the patterns of Greek life were continuous and deliberate. Within these patterns, personal stories unfolded, ambitions were nurtured, and relationships were maintained, all within a framework designed to preserve the city-state across generations. Even as philosophers debated ethics, art depicted heroism, and political assemblies passed decisions, the quiet structure of ordinary life persisted. Daily routines, measured conversation, careful observance of laws, and adherence to social norms ensured that society functioned smoothly. Intimacy, friendship, and family life all existed within these rhythms, quietly shaping the experience of each citizen. To understand ancient Greece fully, it is necessary to observe not only its great thinkers or monumental architecture, but the subtle, persistent ways in which order, repetition, and expectation defined the lives of ordinary people.
Even as citizens conducted their daily lives, Athens was a city of many layers, inhabited not only by free-born men and women, but also by a diverse population of non-citizens and slaves. Metics, or resident foreigners, lived and worked in the city, contributing labor, crafts, and commerce while remaining outside the privileges of full citizenship. They paid taxes, maintained households, and often operated shops, yet their presence was carefully circumscribed by law. They could participate in economic activity, but they were excluded from voting, political office, and legal protections granted to citizens. In this way, the city maintained order while benefiting from the skills and labor of those who were not fully enfranchised. Slaves, who were considered property rather than individuals, performed much of the labor that allowed the city to function. Their work included household chores, construction, agriculture, and artisan trades. Families of citizens depended on slaves to complete daily tasks, which allowed male citizens to attend the agora, participate in assemblies, and engage in philosophical or artistic pursuits. Despite their lack of freedom, many slaves possessed specialized skills, and their labor was essential to both domestic life and the broader economy. The city's hierarchy ensured that everyone, from citizens to metics to slaves, knew their place, and interactions between these groups were governed by both custom and law. Trade and marketplaces formed the lifeblood of the city. Stalls were meticulously arranged to display goods ranging from fresh produce to imported textiles, from clay vessels to metal tools. Merchants followed unwritten rules. Prices were expected to remain stable. Bargaining was conducted politely, and customers were treated with a mixture of courtesy and formality. Economic activity was an extension of civic order, reinforcing the values of diligence, fairness, and predictability. A day at the marketplace was not merely a commercial transaction, it was a lesson in social conduct, hierarchy, and responsibility. Foreign traders brought with them exotic goods, rare spices, and unfamiliar materials. Their presence introduced new ideas, tastes, and techniques into the city, while highlighting the boundaries of citizenship and belonging. Citizens engaged with foreigners cautiously, appreciating the benefits of trade but maintaining social distance. These interactions were guided by expectations and laws designed to preserve the city's internal cohesion. In this manner, commerce was not chaotic. It was a carefully monitored and structured activity that reinforced the values of order and hierarchy. Even in moments of leisure, such as storytelling, music, or quiet conversation, the influence of these structures was apparent. Relationships were cultivated with awareness of social expectation. Friendships, mentorships, and occasional romantic connections were navigated carefully, with attention to hierarchy, discretion, and consequence. The interplay of personal desire and civic duty was subtle but ever present, forming an invisible thread that guided behavior across all layers of life. Through marketplaces, households, religious observances, and social interaction, Athens maintained a rhythm that was both persistent and calming. Citizens, metics, and slaves alike operated within an intricate network of expectation, repetition, and hierarchy. Observing this pattern reveals a civilization in which order and routine were inseparable from human experience, and where even the simplest actions contributed to the endurance of the city-state. Even as Athens thrived in its routines, the intellectual and artistic life of the city occupied a central place in society. Public spaces were not only for commerce or politics, but also for the cultivation of thought. Philosophers walked through the Stoa and the Agora, discussing virtue, justice, and the nature of knowledge. Their voices, measured and deliberate, echoed the rhythm of civic life, and their ideas were transmitted slowly, carefully,
so that listeners could absorb meaning over time. Education, discussion, and debate were considered arts in themselves, requiring patience, attention, and refinement. Art and music were woven seamlessly into this intellectual framework. Sculptors labored over marble, producing figures of calm dignity rather than dramatic excitement. Painters and vase makers depicted scenes of domestic life, myth, and ritual, each image crafted with care and repetition. Music, whether played on the lyre, the aulos, or choral instruments, followed formal structures designed to cultivate harmony, both literally and metaphorically. The practice of these arts demanded long hours of disciplined work, teaching those involved patience, repetition, and respect for tradition. In this environment, hetairai played a distinctive and influential role. Their participation in symposia went beyond companionship or entertainment. They contributed to intellectual exchange, reciting poetry, discussing philosophy, and engaging in debate. Their presence demonstrated that intellect and social skill could coexist, and that influence could arise not only from status or wealth, but also from knowledge and eloquence. By attending these gatherings, citizens were reminded of the value of disciplined conversation, careful listening, and reasoned expression. Even in moments of casual discussion, the measured tone, thoughtful phrasing, and attentive listening reflected a larger societal emphasis on control and propriety. Literature further reinforced these values. Epic poems, dramas, and historical accounts were written with attention to form, clarity, and repetition. Recitation was a common practice, allowing ideas to be absorbed gradually. Oral performance required patience, careful pacing, and a measured tone. Audiences, accustomed to these rhythms, learned to attend attentively, to notice subtle detail, and to internalize cultural lessons. In this way, art, literature, and performance acted as both entertainment and education, shaping perceptions of morality, social order, and acceptable behavior. Philosophy, in particular, emphasized moderation, balance, and reflection. Socrates, Plato, and other thinkers encouraged citizens to consider their actions carefully, to observe the consequences of their choices, and to cultivate virtue through deliberate practice. The rhythm of philosophical discussion mirrored the rhythm of daily life, slow, deliberate, and attentive to detail. Ideas were explored gradually, repeated for clarity, and applied to practical questions of ethics, civic responsibility, and personal conduct. Religious observance intersected naturally with intellectual and artistic life. Temples, festivals, and rituals were occasions for music, poetry, and public debate. Participation in these ceremonies reinforced social hierarchy while providing opportunities for cultural expression. Citizens, metics, and even slaves learned through observation and repetition the appropriate ways to act, speak, and contribute. These rituals reinforced continuity across generations, linking civic, domestic, and spiritual life in a seamless pattern. Even conversation, whether casual or formal, was guided by expectation and etiquette. In homes, marketplaces, and public gatherings, careful attention was paid to tone, phrasing, and pace. Interruptions were rare, and arguments were conducted with civility. This attention to detail created a culture of subtlety in which influence and persuasion relied more on patience and reason than on force or volume. Listeners learned to anticipate outcomes, interpret meaning, and respond appropriately, fostering a quiet intelligence that permeated daily life. In observing Athens over time, one could detect the interplay of repetition, hierarchy, and cultural refinement in every sphere. Household management, Economic activity, public discourse, art, music, and intellectual exchange were all intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Even the most ordinary acts, walking through the streets, preparing food, or conversing with a neighbor, followed rhythms established by centuries of practice and tradition. This pervasive order allowed the city not only to function efficiently, but also to cultivate a sense of continuity and stability. Relationships, too, reflected these patterns. Citizens, hetairai, and other residents navigated connections according to social rules, often balancing personal inclination with communal expectation. Friendships, mentorships, and romantic associations were exercised with discretion, measured speech, and careful observation of hierarchy. Intellectual engagement and artistic contribution were valued as much as lineage or wealth, creating an environment in which influence could be subtle, gradual, and enduring. In this way, social, cultural, and intellectual life formed an interwoven structure, guiding behavior, reinforcing norms, and shaping the experience of every individual. The quiet precision of daily life, the disciplined development of mind and skill, and the measured conduct of public interaction defined Athenian civilization. Behind the grandeur of temples, theaters, and civic buildings lay a system of repetition, expectation, and subtle influence. Citizens understood their roles, observed their duties, and engaged with their peers according to principles that emphasized continuity, moderation, and balance. It was within this ordered framework that personal stories unfolded, ambitions were pursued, and human connections were maintained, always in harmony with the enduring rhythms of the city.
Even as intellectual life and public discourse shaped the minds of citizens, the daily and seasonal rhythms of Athens structured much of ordinary existence. Agriculture remained the backbone of life, and despite the city's cultural achievements, most residents were intimately connected to the land in one way or another. Farmers rose early, their movements governed by the light of dawn and the changing seasons. Fields of barley, wheat, and olives required careful attention throughout the year, and each task was repeated annually with patience and diligence. Plowing, sowing, watering, and harvesting followed predictable patterns, and the cycles of planting and reaping dictated not only the food supply, but also the rhythms of social life. Olive trees, in particular, held both economic and symbolic significance. Their cultivation demanded meticulous care over decades, with pruning, harvesting, and oil production timed precisely. The process required not only labor, but also observation and knowledge, skills passed down from parent to child. Similarly, vineyards were tended carefully, and grape harvesting followed traditional schedules that ensured both quality and continuity. Agricultural work was intertwined with ritual, as festivals marking seasonal transitions or the worship of gods associated with fertility provided structure and guidance. These celebrations were opportunities for communal reflection, reinforcement of social hierarchy, and a momentary respite from daily labor. Domestic life mirrored these larger agricultural and seasonal patterns. Households maintained careful records of food, utensils, and supplies. Cooking was deliberate, often taking hours, with ingredients prepared and stored according to methods developed over generations. Children assisted in chores, learning through repetition the skills necessary to manage their future households. Mothers and wives oversaw these routines, ensuring order, cleanliness, and the efficient use of resources. Every action, from spinning wool to baking bread, contributed to the stability of the home, which in turn supported the broader functioning of the city. Religious festivals punctuated the year, providing both spiritual meaning and social cohesion.
The Panathenaic festival, for example, celebrated the goddess Athena with processions, sacrifices, music, and athletic competitions. Civic pride and reverence for tradition guided every participant, and rituals were conducted with careful attention to detail. In these moments, citizens of all ages observed and absorbed lessons about hierarchy, duty, and respect. Even festivals served as reminders that individual action existed within a framework of collective responsibility, reinforcing the social order in ways both subtle and profound. Markets and commerce adjusted to the seasonal cycle. Merchants brought products from the countryside into the city, aligning the availability of goods with planting or harvesting schedules. Prices and quantities were negotiated carefully, following social norms that emphasized fairness, patience, and predictability. These exchanges were not hurried or chaotic. They unfolded slowly, allowing all participants to anticipate and respond appropriately. Observation and repetition ensured that economic life remained orderly and reliable. Within households, repetition extended to the small, almost imperceptible tasks that knit daily life together. Cleaning floors, repairing clothing, and maintaining storage vessels were carried out in measured steps. The sound of water drawn from wells, loaves of bread kneaded for rising, and the rhythmic motion of weaving created a subtle cadence to domestic activity. Even the smallest motions reinforced the continuity of life, cultivating both calm and efficiency. In this way, the ordinary and the repetitive were not mundane, but essential, sustaining the larger societal framework. The presence of hetairae in symposia contrasted with the more private domestic patterns, but still adhered to principles of order and repetition. Conversations were deliberate, intellectual, and attentive, following social norms that emphasized patience and civility. Their interactions demonstrated that influence, skill, and social connection could operate within the structure of expectation, just as household management, farming, and ritual maintained stability in other spheres. Observing their participation, citizens were reminded that subtlety, preparation, and consistency were valued across all areas of life. As the sun set over tiled rooftops and olive groves, the city slowed in unison with natural cycles. Lamps were lit carefully, meals concluded with attention to order, and households settled into evening routines. Even leisure, in the form of quiet discussion, music, or storytelling, followed rhythms that had been ingrained through years of repetition. Citizens, children, slaves, and metics alike moved through a network of expectation, hierarchy, and habit, each action reinforcing the stability of the larger system. Through agriculture, domestic routines, commerce, and seasonal celebration, Athens maintained a harmonious balance between individual activity and collective order. Daily life, punctuated by repetition and ritual, connected citizens to their surroundings, their families, and their community. The cycles of planting, working, observing, and celebrating created a structure that sustained both survival and culture. Within this carefully maintained framework, ordinary actions, though slow, deliberate, and sometimes monotonous, formed the rhythm of life, the continuity of tradition, and the quiet pulse of one of history's most remarkable societies.
As the day gradually softened into evening, the rhythm of Athens shifted in quiet, deliberate steps. The bustling activity of the agora and workshops slowly diminished. Merchants closed their stalls, carefully storing remaining goods for the next day, while craftsmen cleaned tools and tidied their workspaces. The clatter of the streets gave way to a softer hum of conversation, footsteps, and the occasional neigh of a horse returning to a stable. Street sounds,
once bright and insistent, softened into a pattern that suggested closure, calm, and the gentle winding down of public life. In households, the pace also slowed. Fires were stoked to cook evening meals, pots and vessels arranged with care. Mothers and older women directed tasks quietly, instructing children and slaves with measured tones. Each action, kneading bread, washing vegetables, stirring stews, was carried out with deliberate patience, the repetition itself fostering a sense of continuity and order. Even minor errors were corrected gently, reinforcing skills while preserving calm. The household, like the city, depended on routines repeated over years, each cycle a reassurance that life would continue uninterrupted. Evening offered time for quiet entertainment. Storytelling was common, particularly in the presence of children or close household members. Tales of gods, heroes, and legendary battles were recited slowly, with pauses that allowed listeners to reflect and absorb meaning. Storytellers modulated their voice, emphasizing rhythm over drama, creating a gentle cadence that carried both instruction and comfort. These narratives reinforced societal ideals, bravery, wisdom, cleverness, but always in a measured tone, avoiding excitement and fostering calm attentiveness. Music accompanied domestic leisure as well. A lyre's strings might be plucked softly, producing melodies that filled the room without overwhelming it. Songs of harvest, festivals, or mythic tales accompanied evening routines, blending culture with daily life. The sound itself was structured, deliberate, predictable, and familiar, encouraging focus without agitation. In these small rituals, both children and adults internalized tradition, rhythm, and social norms, learning not only what stories and songs mattered, but how to carry them forward with care. For those who had attended symposia or other public gatherings earlier in the day, the evening offered reflection. Conversations continued quietly, often in smaller groups or among close friends. Philosophical discussion, when it occurred, was slow, patient, and structured. Participants listened as much as they spoke, allowing ideas to unfold gradually. The tone was never urgent. Instead, debate was a gentle exercise in thought and observation, reinforcing civility and careful reasoning. The same principles guided companionship, flirtation, or casual engagement. All interactions were moderated by custom, hierarchy, and the expectation of thoughtful attention. Some households observed religious or domestic rituals at this time. Small altars in homes received offerings of food, wine, or incense. Prayers and acknowledgments of the gods were spoken in soft, deliberate tones, connecting household members to the larger civic and spiritual life. These practices, repeated nightly or during seasonal observances, reinforced continuity and stability, ensuring that even in private spaces, residents were aligned with the rhythms of tradition. The combination of quiet action, repetition, and observance created a gentle cadence, a familiar and reassuring structure that marked the transition from day to night. Slaves and servants, too, followed evening routines. Tasks were completed systematically, sweeping floors, organizing tools, preparing beds or storage spaces. These chores, carried out in repetition, maintained household order while contributing to the larger rhythm of city life. Even those without freedom participated in the careful orchestration of daily life, their labor essential for preserving stability and continuity. The meticulous repetition of small tasks created a pervasive calm, allowing all household members to settle comfortably into the night. In wealthier homes, discussions of culture, art, or philosophy continued, though in subdued form. A reading of poetry, a quiet exchange of ideas, or a shared reflection on current events occurred with attention to pace and tone. Even in moments of intellectual engagement, the emphasis was on measured thought rather than excitement. The city, after all, valued continuity and balance above novelty or impulsive expression. Every action, from the smallest chore to the most complex discussion, fit into a pattern that reinforced social harmony. As darkness deepened, oil lamps were extinguished or dimmed, and rooms grew quiet. Families gathered, and conversation tapered to minimal tones. Children drifted into sleep, while adults lingered only briefly in reflection or prayer. The rhythms established throughout the day, the market, the workshops, the households, the intellectual gatherings, converged in this calm evening closure. Life continued in an orderly fashion, guided by expectation, repetition, and subtle attention to detail. Even in the simplicity of nightfall, Athens exhibited a quiet discipline, a persistent structure that connected individuals, households, and the city as a whole. In this transition from day to night, one could perceive the underlying pattern of Athenian civilization. Intellectual and artistic life, social hierarchy, domestic routine, economic activity, and religious observance were all intertwined. Each sphere reinforced the others, creating a network of calm, repeated behaviors. The repetition was not monotonous in a negative sense. It was deliberate, sustaining stability and continuity. Citizens, medics, slaves, and visitors all moved through the city within this rhythm, participating in a system that balanced individuality with societal expectation, action with reflection, and activity with rest. As darkness fully settled over Athens, the city assumed a hushed, almost imperceptible rhythm. The streets, once filled with the clamor of merchants, craftsmen, and citizens, grew quiet. The faint sounds of footsteps and distant voices faded into the night, replaced by the occasional whisper of wind through olive trees or the subtle clatter of a shutter closing. In these quiet moments, the city itself seemed to breathe, moving with a calm and measured cadence that mirrored the routines of the day. Within households, evening tasks were completed with deliberate care. Pots and utensils were washed and stored, floors swept, and fires banked for warmth. Children were guided to their sleeping areas, often in small rooms with simple bedding, arranged to conserve heat and maintain order. Slaves or servants, attentive to every detail, ensured that the household was secure and organized before night fully fell. These nightly routines, repeated without variation, created a sense of continuity and safety. The ordinary, repetitive actions of household life became a subtle meditation, preparing each resident for rest. Sleep itself was approached with a quiet discipline. Beds were simple, often consisting of straw or padded mats covered with woven blankets or animal hides. Families slept in close proximity, providing warmth and comfort. The physical environment, including soft fabrics, warm bedding, and the faint flicker of lamps, was designed to encourage rest while maintaining calm. Even the arrangement of sleeping areas reflected social hierarchy. Parents and elders occupied central or slightly elevated spaces, while children and slaves rested nearby or at the periphery. Order extended even into rest, reinforcing the broader structure of the household. For those who had participated in intellectual discussions, symposia, or religious observances earlier in the day, the night offered reflection. Thoughts of conversations, philosophical questions, and poetic recitations lingered in the mind, processed slowly as sleep approached. The repetition of daily experience, work, study, ritual, conversation, was absorbed gradually, reinforcing memory, understanding, and social norms. In this way, the night itself became an extension of the city's disciplined rhythm. Quiet rituals occasionally marked the transition from wakefulness to rest. Small prayers or gestures of thanks at household altars connected family members to the divine. Offerings of food, wine, or incense were placed carefully, with attention to symmetry and timing. These acts, repeated night after night, linked the private sphere with the larger civic and religious order. Even in solitude, individuals participated in patterns that sustained the continuity of society. The surrounding environment contributed subtly to the experience of rest. Narrow streets muffled sound, walls and shutters dampened clamor, and the arrangement of homes minimized disturbance. The faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, or the occasional creak of a door were familiar, measured sounds that reinforced a sense of order and predictability. Each noise, each movement fit within the broader structure of the city, creating a consistent auditory landscape conducive to calm and sleep. In larger households, the quiet was punctuated occasionally by the gentle activity of servants or the soft conversation of elders concluding their day. These moments were slow, deliberate, and unobtrusive, preserving the tranquility of the night. Even the smallest motions, the folding of a blanket, the pouring of a final cup of water, the extinguishing of a lamp, were executed with care, emphasizing repetition and continuity. In observing these rhythms, one could see how deeply structured life had become. Order was maintained not only through laws, rituals, and social expectation, but also through the subtle, careful actions of ordinary daily life. The night in Athens was not simply a period of inactivity, it was a continuation of rhythm. Thoughts, reflections, and memories of the day were processed quietly. Habits repeated themselves mentally as well as physically, reinforcing skills, relationships, and social understanding. From the youngest child learning the patterns of domestic chores to the elder contemplating philosophical discussions, all participants moved through a cycle of observation, reflection, and calm. Sleep was the final stage of this rhythm, the natural conclusion of a day carefully structured to balance work, social interaction, education, and ritual. Even in darkness, the city's structure persisted. The alignment of households, the maintenance of quiet streets, and the preparation of residents for rest demonstrated an attention to order that extended beyond the daylight hours. Civilization in Athens was as much about continuity and subtle repetition as it was about grand monuments, political assemblies, or philosophical inquiry. In these quiet nocturnal patterns, one could observe the enduring principle of Greek society, that every action, however small, contributed to the maintenance of balance, harmony, and continuity. As lamps dimmed and homes settled into silence, the city seemed to breathe collectively. Citizens, metics, and slaves alike participated in the calm orchestration of night, each aware, whether consciously or unconsciously, of their role within the wider framework. The gentle rhythms of evening and night carried lessons as much as daily activity: patience, attention, civility, and the quiet persistence of routine. These were the threads that bound the city together, extending into the subconscious as even the body rested.
As the first light of dawn touched the city, Athens began to stir once more, slowly and predictably. The soft golden rays crept across tiled rooftops and stone columns, illuminating the olive groves and narrow streets with a quiet radiance. Birds began their gentle songs, announcing the return of day, while the distant hum of the marketplace hinted at the imminent resumption of life's familiar rhythms. The city, though sleeping only hours before, seemed to awaken with a deliberate patience, as if mindful of the balance that sustained it. Within households, early risers moved carefully,
performing small tasks with minimal disruption. Water was drawn from wells, bread was kneaded, and fires were rekindled to prepare morning meals. Children stretched awake and assisted in simple chores, learning through repetition the routines they would one day manage independently. Mothers and elder women guided each movement, emphasizing patience and precision. Every action, from arranging pottery to tending small gardens or feeding animals, was deliberate, reinforcing a sense of order and continuity. Life resumed not abruptly, but gradually, a gentle unfolding from night to day. The cyclical nature of life was evident not only in daily routines, but also in the broader pattern of seasons. Planting, harvesting, festivals, and rituals marked the passage of time, each returning predictably year after year. Olives and grapes, carefully tended through the months, reminded inhabitants of their connection to the land and to those who had cultivated it before. Each generation observed the practices of the previous one, absorbing skills, customs, and lessons through quiet participation. Children learned by watching and imitating, internalizing rhythms that had persisted for centuries. These cycles, repeated endlessly, created a living continuity, linking past, present, and future. Education and mentorship reinforced this intergenerational connection. Boys and young men received instruction in literacy, arithmetic, music, and physical training, guided by elder citizens who demonstrated patience and deliberate pacing. Girls learned household management, weaving, and basic literacy, preparing for their roles in maintaining domestic order. Every lesson was slow, repeated, and deliberate, ensuring that knowledge, skill, and tradition endured. In this manner, the city's culture was transmitted not only through formal instruction, but through the quiet, persistent patterns of daily life. The marketplace, too, resumed its gentle rhythm. Merchants displayed goods, craftsmen resumed their work, and conversations recommenced at a measured pace. The interactions were predictable, courteous, and deliberate, reflecting an unspoken understanding of social hierarchy and civic expectation. Even the introduction of foreign goods or travelers required careful negotiation, subtle observation, and attention to ritualized politeness. These small, repeated interactions reinforced the larger pattern of the city's life, demonstrating that civic stability depended as much on everyday behavior as on formal law or grand events. Religious observances punctuated these cycles. Seasonal festivals, temple ceremonies, and domestic rituals reminded citizens of their place within a cosmic and civic order. Offerings were presented with care, prayers spoken with attention to cadence, and rituals repeated with precise timing. Participation, whether by citizens, metics, or slaves, reinforced social hierarchy while connecting each individual to a shared rhythm that transcended personal ambition. Even in moments of quiet contemplation, the awareness of these cycles shaped thought, behavior, and expectation. The influence of hetairai, philosophers, poets, and artists persisted throughout these daily and seasonal rhythms. Their teachings, performances, and companionship were absorbed gradually, forming part of the background of life. Conversations, lessons, and observations were repeated over time, ensuring that knowledge, skill, and tradition endured. In this manner, the city's culture was transmitted not only through formal instruction, but through the quiet, persistent patterns of daily life. Families served as the central conduit for these rhythms. Parents and elders modeled behavior, transmitted skills, and reinforced expectation through careful guidance and example. Children internalized these patterns, gradually assuming responsibilities within the household and the city. Even small tasks, cooking, cleaning, tending animals, observing ritual, became lessons in patience, attention, and continuity. The repetition of these actions ensured the survival of knowledge and social cohesion. In observing the cyclical nature of life, one can see that Athens was sustained not only by monumental achievements, public debate, or artistic brilliance, but by the quiet, persistent rhythm of ordinary existence. Each dawn brought renewal, each season offered repetition, and each generation absorbed the careful patterns of those who came before. Citizens, metics, and slaves alike participated in a system that emphasized balance, continuity, and deliberate action. The ordinary tasks of daily life, the repeated rituals of home and city, and the careful cultivation of skill and knowledge all contributed to the enduring stability of the society. As the sun rose higher, illuminating streets, rooftops, and marketplaces, the city moved in unison with its own established rhythms. Work, learning, conversation, and ritual unfolded gradually, predictably, and calmly. Observing these cycles, one recognizes that the power of Athens lay not only in its philosophy, architecture, or governance, but in its meticulous attention to continuity. Each action, however small, reinforced a structure that connected past, present, and future, a structure in which life, learning, and legacy flowed seamlessly.
As the day slowly reached its midpoint, the city's rhythm settled into a familiar continuity. Streets, marketplaces, and workshops moved with a measured flow, citizens performing their roles with practiced calm. Children repeated tasks learned from their parents. Apprentices refined skills under the watchful eyes of masters, and elders observed quietly, ensuring that tradition continued without disruption. Even the smallest, most ordinary actions, pouring water, kneading bread, sweeping floors, were imbued with meaning, part of a larger pattern that had endured for generations. In this way, life in Athens was a tapestry of repetition, observation, and careful attention. Social structures, laws, education, and rituals intertwined seamlessly with daily routines. Each generation absorbed the lessons of the previous one, internalizing practices that reinforced both individual purpose and collective stability. The city's continuity depended not on sudden events or dramatic upheavals, but on the gentle persistence of habit, expectation, and care. Even leisure, conversation, and intellectual engagement followed these rhythms. Discussions with philosophers, poets, or hetairai unfolded slowly, ideas introduced with patience and repeated for clarity. Storytelling, poetry, music, and ritual were absorbed gradually, ensuring that culture, morality, and knowledge were transmitted alongside daily tasks and responsibilities. Every action, spoken word, and subtle observation contributed to the continuity of civilization. The cycles of day and night, work and rest, study and reflection created a quiet stability. Citizens awoke and slept, labored and conversed, observed and participated, all in ways that reinforced the structure of life around them. Even the most ordinary moments, tending a garden, folding cloth, or lighting a lamp, were integral threads in the fabric of society, linking individual experience to collective identity. Through these persistent rhythms, Athens achieved a balance that was both practical and profound. Stability was maintained not by force alone, but by the careful orchestration of daily life, repetition, habit, hierarchy, and subtle guidance. Each citizen, slave, and resident contributed in small but meaningful ways, ensuring that the city-state endured across generations. As the evening approached once more, the city returned to its gentle descent into quiet. Lamps were lit, fires tended, meals concluded. Families settled into their routines, and households breathed in unison with the rhythm of the city.
Stories were whispered, songs hummed softly, and prayers offered with deliberate calm. The lessons of the day lingered in memory, absorbed slowly, ready to guide thought, action, and reflection in the days to come. And as the night stretched on, the city rested beneath the stars, its rhythm uninterrupted. Each dawn would bring the same gentle continuation, each season its familiar tasks, each generation the opportunity to learn, repeat, and preserve the patterns of life. The persistence of these routines, quiet, deliberate, and unbroken, was the true heartbeat of Athens. It was here, in the repetition of ordinary acts, in the patient cultivation of skill and virtue, and in the gentle care for family, home, and community, that Greek civilization endured. The city slept, and with it, the world seemed to hold its breath. Life continued quietly, assuredly, endlessly, an intricate, measured dance of human action and expectation, a rhythm that connected past to future, the individual to the collective, the mundane to the enduring. And in that silence, one could sense the continuity, the subtle pulse of civilization itself, moving gently forward from one day to the next.
If this journey into the quiet rhythms of ancient Greece made you think, pause, or wonder, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of daily life surprised you the most? Did anything make you reflect on your own routines, habits, or traditions? Your questions, observations, and reflections are welcome here, slowly, gently, as part of the conversation we are all sharing. Give your opinion on video comments box.